Lena pressed her hand over her son's tiny mouth and prayed to every spirit of the forest that he would not cry. Outside the den, heavy footsteps crushed the frozen leaves, slow and deliberate, the kind of steps that belonged to someone searching for something they were not supposed to find. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it would give her away before her son ever could. It had happened only 3 nights ago. She had given birth alone, deep in a hollow beneath an old oak root, far from the eyes of the pack. When the baby finally opened his eyes and let out his first breath, she froze. His fur was silver, not the pale gray some pups carried before their coats darkened with age, but a deep shining silver, like moonlight caught in water. She had never seen fur like it, not on any wolf in the Blackthorn pack, not even in the oldest stories the elders whispered by the fire. She knew immediately what it meant, or rather, she knew what others would believe it meant. The old legend had followed the pack for generations, passed down in hushed voices, always spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. A silver-born child would rise to either save the pack from ruin or drag it into destruction. No one agreed on which fate awaited such a child, only that his birth would never be ignored. Lena was not a woman with power. She held no high rank, no strong bloodline, no mate who sat close to the throne. She was simply a healer's assistant, gentle and quiet, someone the pack barely noticed unless they needed her herbs for a fever or a wound. If the elders learned that a child of prophecy had been born to a woman like her, she feared they would take him from her arms before she even had the chance to name him. So she made a choice in the dark hours after his birth. She would hide him. She wrapped him in leaves soaked with crushed walnut shells, staining his silver fur into a dull, forgettable brown. It would not last forever, she knew that. A wolf's true coloring always found its way back, especially during a full shift, but it would buy her time to think, time to plan, time to decide how to protect a child the whole pack might either worship or fear. The footsteps outside the den stopped. Lena held her breath. Her son, sensing her fear, stayed silent against her chest, his small body trembling only slightly. She glanced toward the entrance of the den, half expecting to see a shadow blocking the moonlight. "Lena?" a voice called. It was Ivy, her closest friend since childhood, gentle and familiar. "Are you in there? Everyone's asking where you went." Relief flooded through her, though she did not let it show completely. She waited a moment longer before answering, steadying her voice into something calm and ordinary. "I'm here," she said. "The birth took longer than expected. I needed rest." Ivy crouched at the entrance, peering in with warm brown eyes. She was one of the few who knew Lena had been pregnant, though even she did not know the exact night the birth had happened. Lena had kept that secret carefully guarded, telling only that her time was near, never revealing when it finally came. "Let me see him," Ivy said, her tone soft with excitement. "Everyone wants to know if it's a boy or a girl." Lena's arms tightened instinctively around her son. She forced a small smile, though her mind raced through every possible danger of the moment. If Ivy saw even a hint of silver beneath the walnut stain, word would spread by morning. And if word spread, it would eventually reach the one person Lena feared most in the entire pack. The Alpha King had left for battle 3 moons ago, deep in a territorial dispute with a neighboring pack. His return was expected any day now, and though he was not present to witness the birth, Lena knew his advisors would report every unusual event that occurred in his absence. A silver-born pup would not stay hidden from him for long, not once he returned and began asking questions, as he always did. "He's healthy," Lena said finally, allowing Ivy to step closer. "A boy, strong lungs already." Ivy peeked at the small bundle, her eyes softening at the sight of the sleeping infant. The stained fur, dulled by the walnut wash, looked ordinary enough in the dim light of the den, brownish and unremarkable, much like any other newborn pup born that season. "He's beautiful," Ivy whispered. "Have you chosen a name?" Lena had thought about this more than anything else since his birth. A name held weight in their culture, often chosen to reflect strength, loyalty, or a trait the parents hoped their child would grow into. She wanted something quiet, something that would not draw attention, yet something that felt right for the small life resting against her heart. "Ren," she said softly. Small, but sharp-eyed, quick enough to survive anything. Ivy smiled, clearly satisfied with the choice, unaware of the deeper meaning behind it. She stayed only a few more minutes before standing to leave, promising to bring food and fresh water later in the evening. Once alone again, Lena allowed herself to breathe fully for the first time since Ivy's arrival. She looked down at Ren, his small chest rising and falling steadily, his tiny paws twitching as he dreamed whatever dreams pups dreamed. She traced a finger gently along his brow, careful not to disturb the drying stain covering his fur. I will protect you, she whispered, no matter what it costs me. The days that followed blurred together in a careful routine of secrecy. Lena kept Ren close, rarely allowing others near enough to notice the faint shimmer beneath his coat whenever moonlight touched him directly. She reapplied the walnut stain every few days, careful to time it during the early morning hours when most of the pack still slept. She avoided gatherings whenever possible, using the excuse of postpartum exhaustion to keep herself and her son away from curious eyes. The healer who had assisted with parts of her pregnancy, an elderly woman named Marta, occasionally checked on her, though Lena made certain those visits happened only during daylight, when Ren's fur appeared its dullest. Marta was sharp though, sharper than most gave her credit for. During one visit, she lingered a moment too long, studying the pup's face with an expression Lena could not quite read. He has unusual eyes, Marta said finally, tilting her head slightly. Silver, almost, like moonlight on water. Lena's stomach tightened. She forced herself to laugh lightly, waving a hand as though the comment amused her. Many pups have unusual eye colors before they settle, she said. My own eyes were nearly gold when I was born, according to my mother. They darkened within a season. Marta studied her a moment longer, something unreadable passing behind her gaze, before she nodded slowly and let the matter rest. Lena did not know whether the healer believed her explanation, or simply chose not to press further, but either way, the encounter left her shaken for the rest of the day. She began to realize that hiding Ren would require more than walnut stains and quiet excuses. She needed a long-term plan, something that would let her keep him safe not just for weeks, but for years, until he was old enough to understand the danger surrounding his very existence. That night, after Ren finally settled into sleep, Lena sat at the entrance of her den and stared out at the moonlit forest. The pack's territory stretched far beyond what she could see. Forests and hills and rivers all bound together under the rule of the Alpha King. She had never met him personally, not truly. She had seen him from a distance during pack gatherings, tall and commanding, his presence enough to silence even the boldest wolves in the territory. He was known for his sharp mind as much as his strength, a leader who noticed details others overlooked. If even a fraction of what she had heard about him was true, hiding Ren from him indefinitely would be nearly impossible once he returned from battle. But Lena refused to let fear control her decisions. She had survived difficult seasons before, had raised herself through hardship after losing her own parents to a harsh winter years ago. She was no stranger to quiet strength, to doing what needed to be done without drawing attention to herself. She would find a way to protect her son, even if it meant deceiving an entire pack, even if it meant standing against forces far more powerful than herself. The following morning brought unsettling news that spread quickly through the territory. A group of scouts reported spotting unfamiliar tracks near the northern border, tracks belonging to wolves not native to Blackthorn lands. Whispers of a possible threat rippled through the community, pulling attention away from newborn pups and toward matters of safety and defense. For the first time since Ren's birth, Lena felt a small measure of relief. With the pack's focus shifted elsewhere, fewer eyes would linger on her and her son. She used the distraction to her advantage, moving more freely through the territory, gathering herbs for the healers while keeping Ren bundled close against her chest. During one such trip, she crossed paths with Garrick, a wolf she had known since childhood, though their connection had grown distant over recent years. Garrick was Ren's father, though few in the pack knew the truth of their brief relationship, one that had ended quietly before Lena's pregnancy became known. Garrick's eyes lingered on the bundle in her arms, curiosity evident in his expression. Lena tensed, uncertain how much he suspected, uncertain whether he had pieced together the timeline of their past encounter and her current motherhood. "Congratulations," I said simply, his tone carefully neutral. "I heard you had your pup." "Thank you," Lena replied, matching his careful tone. "He's healthy, strong." Garrick studied her a moment longer, something flickering behind his eyes that Lena could not quite identify. Whether it was suspicion, curiosity, or simple politeness, she could not tell. He said nothing more on the matter, offering only a brief nod before continuing on his way, leaving Lena to wonder how much longer she could keep her secret contained within the walls of her own small world. As the days turned into weeks, Ren grew steadily, his small body gaining strength with each passing season. Lena watched him with a mixture of pride and quiet dread, aware that every stage of his growth brought new challenges to keeping his true nature hidden. His first attempts at shifting were still months away, but she knew that when they came, the walnut stain would no longer be enough to disguise what lay beneath his fur. She began preparing herself mentally for that day, rehearsing explanations, considering escape routes, mapping out every possible outcome she could imagine. She refused to be caught unprepared when the moment finally arrived. refused to let fear paralyze her when her son's safety depended on her ability to think clearly and act decisively. Late one evening, as she sat rocking Ren gently in her arms, she heard distant howls echoing across the territory, a pattern she recognized immediately. It was the call announcing a leader's return, deep and resonant, carrying across the hills with unmistakable authority. The Alpha King had come home. Lena's blood ran cold as the howls continued, rippling through the forest like a warning she could not ignore. She held Ren tighter against her chest, staring out into the darkness beyond her den, knowing that everything she had worked to protect now faced its greatest test. The pack would gather soon to welcome their leader home, a tradition as old as the territory itself. Attendance was expected, nearly mandatory, and absence would raise more questions than she could afford. She would have to bring Ren, would have to stand among the crowd with her son hidden beneath careful disguises and quiet prayers. She closed her eyes, steadying her breathing, gathering the courage she would need for what lay ahead. Whatever happened next, she promised herself she would not falter, would not let her fear show, would protect her son with every ounce of strength she possessed. The morning of the gathering arrived far too quickly. Lena dressed Ren carefully, applying a fresh layer of walnut stain to his fur, checking every inch of his small body for any hint of silver that might catch unwanted attention. She wrapped him snugly, positioning him against her chest in a way that would keep most of his face hidden from casual observers. As she made her way toward the gathering grounds, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, though she knew most of the attention was directed toward the returning warriors rather than herself. Still, every glance felt like a potential threat, every whispered conversation a possible discovery waiting to unfold. The gathering grounds buzzed with energy, wolves of every rank pressed together beneath the open sky, waiting for their leader to appear. Lena found a spot near the back of the crowd, close enough to observe but far enough to remain inconspicuous, or so she hoped. When Kale finally emerged from the northern path, the crowd fell into an immediate, respectful silence. He walked with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat, his dark coat gleaming under the morning sun, his presence commanding attention without any need for words. Battle scars marked his form, evidence of the conflict he had just returned from, yet he carried himself with unshaken authority. Lena watched him carefully, studying the sharp intelligence in his gaze as he surveyed the crowd before him. She had heard stories of his ability to notice things others missed, small details that revealed larger truths. She prayed silently that her careful preparations would be enough to keep her secret hidden from eyes as perceptive as his. Kale began addressing the crowd, his voice steady and commanding, speaking of the victory achieved against their rivals, of the sacrifices made, of the strength the pack had shown in his absence. Lena listened with half her attention, the other half focused entirely on keeping Ren still and quiet against her chest. As the address continued, she felt a small movement beneath her hold, Ren stirring slightly, perhaps disturbed by the noise of the crowd or the shift in her posture. She glanced down quickly, relieved to see him simply adjusting his position, his eyes still closed in peaceful sleep. She allowed herself a small breath of relief, believing the worst danger had passed for the day. She had no way of knowing that this gathering would mark only the beginning of a much larger storm, one that would soon test every ounce of courage and cunning she possessed as a mother determined to protect her child against forces far greater than herself. 3 days after the gathering, Lena found herself walking past the elders' meeting hollow, a shaded clearing ringed by tall stones where the oldest members of the pack gathered to discuss matters too sensitive for open ears. She had not intended to stop there. Her path had simply carried her close enough to hear fragments of conversation drifting through the trees, and once she recognized the topic, she could not force herself to walk away. "The signs have been building for years," came the voice of Doran, the eldest of the elders, a wolf so old that his fur had turned nearly white with age. The strange lights over the northern ridge last winter, the silver stream that appeared and vanished within a single season, now this. "You cannot be certain a pup's birth connects to any of that," another voice argued, sharper and more skeptical. Lena recognized it as belonging to Edwin, one of the younger elders who had earned his position through cunning rather than wisdom, or so many in the pack whispered privately. "The prophecy has always spoken of these signs together," Doran replied, his tone patient but firm. "A silver birth following a season of unusual omens. It matches exactly what the old texts describe." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself closer to the tree beside her, straining to hear every word, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might betray her presence. "And if it does match," Edwin continued, his voice edged with something Lena could not quite name, "what then? Do we simply hand power over to an infant because old stories claim he holds some destiny? The prophecy does not speak of handing over power, Doran corrected. It speaks of guidance. A choice the pack will face when the child comes of age. Whether he leads us toward strength or whether his very existence invites ruin, depends entirely on how he is raised and who influences him. A heavy silence followed those words, one that stretched long enough for Lena to consider slipping away before anyone noticed her presence. But something kept her rooted in place, a desperate need to understand exactly what danger her son faced. We do not even know if such a child has been born, a third voice interjected, calmer than the others. Lena recognized this one as belonging to Marta, the healer who had visited her den on multiple occasions. Rumors of silver fur have circulated before, always proving false upon closer inspection. Perhaps, Doran said slowly, but rumors persist for a reason. I intend to look deeper into recent births within the territory, starting with those born during the recent full moon. Lena's blood ran cold. Ren had been born precisely during that window, a detail she had hoped would remain buried among the ordinary business of pack life. If Doran began investigating recent births with any thoroughness, her careful concealment would face far greater scrutiny than she had prepared for. She forced herself to move away from the hollow before her presence could be discovered, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just overheard. The elders were not merely curious bystanders in this matter. They intended to actively search for the child described in their prophecy, and unless she found a way to deflect their attention, that search would inevitably lead them straight to her door. Returning to her den, she found Ren awake and restless, his small paws kicking against the soft bedding as he made quiet sounds of discomfort. She lifted him gently, cradling him against her chest, trying to calm both his unease and her own racing thoughts. I heard them talking about you, she whispered softly, though she knew he could not yet understand her words. They want to find you. I won't let them, not until I know their intentions are pure. She spent the following hours pacing within her den, weighing every option available to her. She could attempt to leave the territory entirely, taking Ren far from Blackthorn lands to somewhere the prophecy held no meaning, somewhere he could grow up as an ordinary pup without the weight of ancient stories shadowing his every step. But such a journey carried its own dangers. Wolves traveling alone through unclaimed lands often faced threats from rival packs or the harsh unpredictability of nature itself. Alternatively, she could remain and continue her careful deception, hoping her efforts would hold strong enough to outlast the elders' curiosity. But if Doran truly intended to investigate recent births with thoroughness, she doubted her methods would remain effective indefinitely. A third option lingered at the edges of her mind, one she had avoided considering seriously until now. She could seek an audience with the Alpha King himself, revealing the truth before the elders forced the matter into the open on their own terms. If she controlled how and when the truth emerged, perhaps she could shape the narrative surrounding her son's birth, framing him not as a threat to be feared, but as a child deserving protection and guidance. The thought terrified her almost as much as discovery itself. Kale was known for his sharp judgment, his ability to see through deception and manipulation with ease. Approaching him directly meant placing her son's fate entirely in his hands, trusting a leader she had never personally spoken with to make a decision that could determine whether Ren lived a life of safety or one of constant danger. Yet the more she considered her options, the more she recognized that waiting passively for discovery carried its own significant risk. If the elders found Ren through their own investigation, framed by suspicion and fear rather than her own careful explanation, the outcome could prove far worse than if she approached the situation on her own terms. She spent the following days gathering courage, watching for an opportunity that might allow her to approach the Alpha King without drawing unwanted attention from the elders or other curious pack members. Such opportunities proved rare, as Kale remained heavily guarded following his return from battle, surrounded constantly by advisors and warriors discussing matters of territory and defense. During this period of careful observation, Lena crossed paths again with Ivy, who noticed the tension evident in her friend's demeanor, despite Lena's attempts to appear calm and composed. "You've seemed troubled these past few days," Ivy said gently, settling beside Lena near the riverbank where they had gathered water. "Is something wrong with Ren?" Lena hesitated, torn between her instinct toward secrecy and her deep desire to confide in someone she trusted. Ivy had been a loyal friend for years, someone who had never given Lena reason to doubt her discretion or loyalty. Yet the stakes involved in Ren's secret were simply too high to risk sharing, even with someone she trusted deeply. "Just the exhaustion of new motherhood," Lena said finally, offering a small tired smile. "Sleepless nights and constant worry. Nothing more than that." Ivy studied her for a long moment, clearly unconvinced but respectful enough not to push further. "If you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here," she said simply, before returning her attention to filling her water container. Lena appreciated the gesture, even as guilt gnawed at her for withholding the truth from someone who had shown her nothing but kindness. She reminded herself that her silence protected not just herself but Ivy as well, sparing her friend from the danger of holding such a significant secret. That evening, as she settled Ren into sleep, she noticed something that sent a fresh wave of alarm through her chest. Beneath the dulling effects of the walnut stain, faint silver threads had begun appearing along his tiny paws, more visible than they had been just days before. His body was growing, his true nature beginning to assert itself despite her best efforts at concealment. She understood then that time was running short. Whatever plan she chose to pursue, she would need to act soon, before nature itself betrayed the secret she had worked so desperately to protect. The following morning, fate presented her with an opportunity she had not anticipated. Word spread through the pack that the Alpha King intended to personally review recent developments within the territory, including checking on families who had welcomed new pups during his absence. It was tradition for a leader to acknowledge new life within his pack, offering blessings and support to mothers who had given birth during difficult seasons. Lena's stomach twisted with a mixture of dread and cautious hope upon hearing this news. If Kale intended to visit new mothers personally, she would inevitably face him regardless of her own preparations. Yet perhaps this circumstance offered exactly the controlled environment she had hoped to create, an opportunity to present her son's truth on terms slightly more favorable than an elder-led investigation might allow. She spent the remaining hours before his expected arrival, preparing herself mentally, rehearsing what she might say, considering how she could frame Ren's unusual coloring in a way that emphasized protection rather than fear. She would not lie outright when faced with direct questioning, she decided. Deception through omission had served her well thus far, but outright lies to the Alpha King himself carried consequences she dared not risk. As afternoon approached, she heard the now familiar sound of measured footsteps approaching her den, accompanied by quieter steps she assumed belonged to advisors or guards. Her heart pounded as she gathered Ren into her arms, standing to greet whoever approached with as much composure as she could muster. The entrance to her den darkened as a tall figure blocked the sunlight, and Lena found herself staring directly into the sharp, assessing gaze of Kale himself, the Alpha King standing mere steps away from discovering the secret she had guarded so carefully since the night of Ren's birth. Kale did not speak immediately. He simply studied her, his gaze sweeping over the small den before settling on the bundle held carefully against her chest. Lena forced herself to meet his eyes, refusing to let her fear show on the surface, though her heart hammered against her ribs with an intensity that made breathing feel difficult. "Lena," he said finally, his voice deep and measured, carrying an authority that filled the small space entirely. "I understand you welcomed a son recently." "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor she felt building within her chest. 3 weeks ago now." Kale stepped closer, his advisors remaining respectfully outside the den's entrance, granting a small measure of privacy that Lena had not expected. He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her level, his sharp eyes studying Ren's small, sleeping face with an intensity that made her want to shield her son from his gaze entirely. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the pup with an unexpected gentleness that caught Lena slightly off guard. She hesitated only a moment before nodding, carefully shifting Ren so Kale could observe him more closely, though she kept her arms positioned protectively, ready to pull back at the first sign of danger. Kale reached out, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he brushed a finger along Ren's small cheek, studying the color of his fur beneath the fading walnut stain. Lena held her breath, watching every flicker of expression crossing the Alpha King's face. For a long, tense moment he said nothing, his brow furrowing slightly as though something about the pup's appearance had caught his attention. "His coloring is unusual," Kale observed finally, his tone carefully neutral, giving nothing away of his true thoughts. "Brownish, yet with something underneath. Almost like a shadow beneath the surface." Lena's pulse quickened, panic threatening to overwhelm her careful composure. "Many pups have unusual undertones at birth," she said quickly, echoing the same explanation she had given Marta weeks before. "It usually settles within the first few moons." Kale studied her closely now, his sharp gaze shifting from Ren to Lena herself, as though searching for something within her expression that might confirm or deny her words. Lena forced herself to remain still, to keep her breathing steady, refusing to give him any reason for further suspicion. "Perhaps," Kale said slowly, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. He straightened, stepping back slightly, though his eyes lingered on Ren a moment longer before returning fully to Lena. The elders have been discussing certain matters recently, old prophecies regarding unusual births. Lena's stomach dropped, though she forced herself to maintain a calm expression. I've heard rumors, she admitted carefully, deciding that acknowledging some awareness might appear less suspicious than feigning complete ignorance. Superstitions from the older generation, I assumed. Perhaps, Cale repeated, his tone giving nothing away. Though I have learned throughout my years leading this pack, that old stories often carry threads of truth within their exaggerations. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, Lena unsure how to respond without either revealing too much or appearing evasive in a way that might deepen his suspicion further. Cale studied her a moment longer before finally straightening fully, his expression returning to the composed authority he carried during formal duties. I wish you well with your son, he said finally, his tone shifting back toward the polite formality expected during such visits. Should you require anything for his care, the pack's resources remain available to all mothers. Thank you, Lena replied, relief flooding through her chest, even as lingering unease remained from their exchange. Cale turned to leave, his advisors falling into step behind him as he exited her den. Just before disappearing from view, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder with an expression Lena could not quite decipher. Take care of him, he said simply, before continuing on his way, leaving Lena standing alone in her den, uncertain whether his final words carried a hidden warning or simply genuine concern for a new mother and her child. She remained frozen for several long moments after his departure, replaying every detail of their conversation, searching for signs of how much he truly suspected. His observation about Ren's unusual coloring troubled her deeply, suggesting that even beneath the walnut stain, hints of the truth had become visible to eyes sharp enough to notice. She spent the following days in a state of heightened vigilance, reapplying the stain more frequently, avoiding unnecessary interactions with pack members who might ask too many questions. Yet despite her precautions, she could not shake the feeling that Cale's visit had marked a turning point, that his attention now rested upon her and her son in ways that would prove difficult to escape entirely. Word soon reached her, through Ivy's usual network of gossip and observation, that the Alpha King had requested Doran and the other elders compile a full account of every pup born during the recent full moon, along with detailed descriptions of their coloring and any unusual traits observed at birth. Lena's blood ran cold upon hearing this news, understanding immediately that such an investigation would inevitably lead the elders directly to her den. She realized she could no longer rely solely on concealment. If discovery was truly inevitable, she needed to shift her strategy entirely, finding a way to control the narrative surrounding Ren's birth before others could shape it according to their own fears or ambitions. That evening she sought out Marta, deciding that the healer's earlier suspicion made her a potential ally rather than simply a threat to be avoided. She found the elderly woman preparing herbs within her small dwelling near the healing grounds, the scent of crushed leaves and dried roots filling the modest space. I need to speak with you, Lena said carefully, closing the entrance behind her to ensure privacy. About Ren. Marta looked up, her expression unreadable, though something in her eyes suggested she had been expecting this conversation for some time. I wondered when you might come to me directly, she said simply, gesturing for Lena to sit. Lena settled onto the woven mat across from the healer, gathering her courage before speaking further. You noticed something unusual about his eyes, weeks ago. I believe you've suspected the truth since then. Marta nodded slowly, her expression softening into something resembling sympathy rather than judgment. I have seen silver fur only once before, many years ago, in stories passed down from my own mother's time. I did not wish to voice my suspicions without certainty, understanding the danger such an accusation might bring upon you and your child. Then you understand why I've hidden him, Lena said, relief washing through her at finding someone who grasped the full weight of her situation. I don't know if the prophecy speaks truth or superstition, but I cannot risk my son's safety based on stories I cannot verify. The prophecy is real, Marta said quietly, her tone carrying a gravity that sent a chill through Lena's chest. Or at least, the belief in it is real enough to shape how the pack will respond, regardless of whether ancient magic truly guides his fate. That belief alone makes him vulnerable to those who fear what they do not understand, and valuable to those who might seek to use his existence for their own ambitions. Lena absorbed these words carefully, understanding the deeper truth Marta had revealed. Whether the prophecy held genuine mystical power, or existed simply as a story shaping the pack's collective fears and hopes, the consequences for Ren remained the same either way. He would be seen as significant, as dangerous or valuable, and that perception alone would determine how others treated him throughout his life. What would you have me do? Lena asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts at composure. The elders will find him eventually. Perhaps they already suspect. Marta considered this question for a long moment, her weathered face reflecting years of wisdom and careful thought. You could continue hiding him, though I fear that path grows more difficult with each passing season. Or you could reveal him yourself, on your own terms, framing his birth in a way that emphasizes hope rather than fear. And if the elders or others react with fear regardless of how I frame it, Lena asked, voicing the concern that had haunted her thoughts for weeks. Then you will need an ally powerful enough to protect him despite that fear, Marta said simply, someone whose word carries enough weight to silence those who might wish him harm. Lena understood immediately who Marta implied, though the thought filled her with renewed anxiety. Trusting Cale with her son's fate felt like an enormous risk, yet she recognized increasingly that few other options remained available to her. She left Marta's dwelling that evening with much to consider, the weight of impossible choices pressing heavily upon her shoulders. As she walked back toward her own den beneath the darkening sky, she noticed movement in the shadows nearby, a figure watching her from a distance that made her pulse quicken with fresh alarm. Stepping closer to investigate, she recognized Edwin, the young elder whose skeptical voice she had overheard during the earlier discussion near the meeting hollow. His expression, illuminated faintly by the rising moon, carried something calculating and unsettling, as though he had been observing her movements for some time, gathering information she would have preferred to keep entirely private. Edwin stepped out from the shadows, his movements deliberate, almost predatory, as he closed the distance between them. Lena instinctively pulled Ren closer against her chest, her body tensing as she prepared to defend her son against whatever threat this encounter might bring. "Lena," Edwin said, his voice carrying a false pleasantness that did nothing to ease her growing unease. "Out rather late for a new mother, don't you think?" "I could say the same of you," she replied carefully, keeping her tone even despite the anxiety building within her. Edwin's lips curved into something resembling a smile, though it never reached his eyes. "I find myself curious about many things lately. Recent births, unusual colorings, healers who suddenly grow protective of certain mothers within the pack." Lena's heart pounded, understanding immediately that Edwin had likely observed her visit to Marta's dwelling. She forced herself to remain composed, refusing to let her fear show openly despite the danger she sensed radiating from his calculated demeanor. "I don't understand your meaning," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Don't you?" Edwin stepped closer, his gaze flicking toward Ren before returning to Lena's face. "The prophecy speaks of great change, Lena. Change that could shift the balance of power within this pack entirely. Some of us have worked hard to secure our positions, our influence, our futures. We do not welcome disruption easily, regardless of what old stories might claim about destiny or fate." The threat implicit within his words sent a fresh wave of fear through Lena's chest. She understood now that Edwin's concerns extended beyond simple superstition or fear of the unknown. He saw the prophecy, and by extension her son, as a genuine threat to whatever ambitions he harbored within the pack's political structure. "My son is simply a pup," she said firmly, injecting as much conviction into her voice as she could manage. "Whatever old stories claim about Silver Fur means nothing until he grows old enough to make his own choices about his place within this pack." "Perhaps," Edwin said, though his tone suggested he remained entirely unconvinced. "Or perhaps those choices will be made for him, long before he reaches an age capable of understanding the weight they carry. I would advise caution, Lena. The path you walk grows increasingly dangerous with each passing day." Without waiting for her response, Edwin turned and disappeared back into the shadows from which he had emerged, leaving Lena standing alone in the darkness with her son clutched protectively against her chest. Her mind raced through the implications of his words, understanding that she now faced threats from multiple directions, the elder's investigation on one side, and Edwin's personal ambitions on the other. She hurried back to her den, securing Ren safely within, before allowing herself a moment to process the encounter fully. Edwin's veiled threats troubled her deeply, suggesting that even if she managed to navigate the elder's investigation successfully, other forces within the pack might seek to harm her son for entirely different reasons, rooted in political ambition rather than superstitious fear. The following days passed in a haze of constant vigilance, Lena barely sleeping as she monitored every sound outside her den, every unfamiliar shadow that crossed her path during necessary excursions for food and supplies. Ren, sensing his mother's heightened anxiety, grew increasingly restless, his cries during the night carrying a volume that made concealment feel like an increasingly fragile illusion. During one particularly difficult night, as Ren's cries pierced through the darkness despite her best efforts to soothe him, Lena heard a soft knock against the entrance of her den. Panic surged through her chest as she quickly gathered her son, preparing herself for whatever confrontation awaited outside. To her relief, she found Ivy standing there, concern evident on her friend's face rather than the suspicion or threat she had braced herself to encounter. "I heard him crying from my own den," Ivy said softly, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. "Is everything all right? You've seemed so distant these past weeks, Lena. I'm worried about you." Lena hesitated, torn once again between her instinct toward secrecy and her deep need for support during this increasingly overwhelming situation. Watching Ivy's genuine concern, she felt something within her finally break, the weight of carrying such a significant secret entirely alone becoming too much to bear. "I need to tell you something," Lena said finally, her voice trembling with the culmination of weeks of suppressed fear and exhaustion. "Something about Ren that I've kept hidden since his birth." Ivy settled beside her, patient and attentive, offering the kind of unwavering support that only genuine friendship could provide. Lena took a deep breath, lying herself before revealing the truth she had guarded so carefully for so long. "His fur," she said quietly, reaching for the small container of walnut stain she kept hidden within her den. "It isn't naturally brown." She demonstrated carefully, using a damp cloth to gently wipe away a small patch of stain from Ren's tiny paw, revealing the shimmering silver fur beneath. Ivy's eyes widened significantly as she observed the true coloring, her breath catching audibly in the quiet space of the den. "Silver," Ivy whispered, understanding dawning across her features as she connected this revelation to the prophecy discussions that had begun circulating throughout the pack in recent weeks. "Lena, this is—" "I know," Lena interrupted, her voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and desperate pleading. "I know exactly what this means, and exactly how dangerous it could be for him. That's why I've hidden him. Why I've maintained this deception for weeks despite the toll it has taken on both of us." Ivy remained silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she had just learned. When she finally spoke, her voice carried steady reassurance, rather than the fear or judgment Lena had braced herself to expect. "You're not alone in this," Ivy said firmly, reaching out to grasp Lena's hand in a gesture of solidarity. "Whatever comes next, whatever danger this brings, I will help you protect him in any way I can." Tears welled in Lena's eyes, relief and gratitude flooding through her chest at finally having someone beyond herself who understood the full weight of her situation. She explained everything to Ivy in the hours that followed, detailing the Elder's investigation, Marta's suggestion of seeking Cale's protection, and Edwin's veiled threats regarding political ambitions that extended far beyond simple superstition. "You need to act soon," Ivy said finally, once Lena had finished recounting every detail of the past weeks. "Before the Elders complete their investigation, before Edwin decides to use whatever information he's gathered against you. If Marta believes seeking the Alpha King's protection offers the best path forward, perhaps it's time to trust that judgment." Lena knew Ivy spoke wisely, understanding that continued concealment grew more dangerous with each passing day, particularly with Edwin's suspicious observations already circling closer to the truth. Yet the thought of directly approaching Cale, of revealing everything before she felt fully prepared, filled her with renewed anxiety. "What if he decides Ren represents too great a risk?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear that had haunted her thoughts since her earlier encounter with the Alpha King. "What if, rather than offering protection, he decides the prophecy demands a different response entirely?" Ivy considered this question seriously before responding. "From everything I've heard about Cale, he values strength and strategic thinking above blind adherence to old superstitions. Perhaps if you approach him with confidence, framing Ren's potential as an asset rather than simply a source of fear, he might see value in offering protection rather than viewing your son as a threat requiring elimination." Lena absorbed these words carefully, recognizing the wisdom within Ivy's perspective. She had spent weeks viewing her situation purely through the lens of fear and concealment, yet perhaps a different approach existed, one that emphasized strength and strategic value rather than simply pleading for mercy or protection based on maternal desperation alone. As dawn began breaking through the darkness outside her den, Lena made her decision. She would seek an audience with Cale directly, presenting Ren's truth on her own terms before Edwin or the Elders could shape the narrative according to their own fears or ambitions. She would trust her instincts, trust the strength she had carried throughout her difficult journey as a mother determined to protect her child against overwhelming odds. Ivy remained by her side throughout the following hours, helping her prepare both mentally and practically for the significant confrontation that awaited. They discussed exactly how Lena might phrase her request for an audience, how she might present the truth in a way that emphasized her son's potential value to the pack rather than simply the danger his existence represented, according to ancient superstition. By midday, Lena felt as prepared as she could reasonably become given the circumstances. She gathered Ren carefully, no longer bothering to apply fresh walnut stain, understanding that concealment no longer served her purpose given her decision to reveal the truth directly to the Alpha King himself. As she made her way toward the central grounds where Kale typically conducted pack business, she felt a strange mixture of terror and resolve settling within her chest. Whatever outcome awaited her at the end of this journey, she knew she could no longer continue living in the shadows of constant fear and concealment. The time had come to face the truth directly, to trust that her son's fate might rest safely within the judgment of a leader known for his sharp intelligence and strategic wisdom, rather than continuing to hide from a destiny that seemed increasingly impossible to escape entirely. The central grounds bustled with activity as Lena approached, pack members moving between various tasks, some carrying supplies, others engaged in quiet conversation near the great meeting stone where Kale typically addressed important matters. She scanned the area, searching for a guard or advisor who might help her arrange the audience she had come seeking. Before she could locate anyone suitable, a commotion near the eastern edge of the grounds drew her attention. A group of young pups had gathered for their daily training exercises, supervised by several experienced warriors who guided them through basic movement drills appropriate for their age. Lena's stomach dropped as she realized the training session included pups born around the same time as Ren, meaning curious mothers and observers had gathered nearby to watch their children's progress. She attempted to steer clear of the gathering, keeping to the outer edges of the grounds as she continued searching for someone to assist with her request. However, Ren, sensing the energy and movement surrounding the training exercises, began squirming excitedly within her arms, his small body straining toward the activity, with the innocent curiosity typical of young pups eager to explore their surroundings. "Stay calm," Lena whispered softly, attempting to soothe him while maintaining her careful path around the crowded area. But Ren's excitement only grew, his small form wriggling with increasing insistence until, before Lena could react quickly enough, he slipped partially free from her protective hold. In that brief, chaotic moment, something remarkable and terrifying happened simultaneously. Startled by the sudden shift in his position, Ren's body responded instinctively, triggering his very first attempt at shifting between his wolf and human forms. A natural developmental milestone that Lena had known would eventually arrive, but had desperately hoped to delay until she could better control the circumstances surrounding it. The transformation lasted only seconds, Ren's small body flickering between forms with the clumsy, uncontrolled energy typical of a first shift. But those brief seconds proved more than enough for the walnut stain, weakened already by days without fresh application, to reveal the truth hidden beneath it entirely. Silver fur, brilliant and unmistakable even in the bright daylight, shimmered visibly across Ren's small form before he settled back into his more stable infant shape, his brown-stained fur now streaked dramatically with patches of gleaming silver that no amount of explanation could disguise. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby crowd as several onlookers witnessed the transformation clearly. Lena froze, her heart plummeting as she realized the moment she had feared for weeks had finally arrived, not through careful revelation on her own terms, but through an uncontrolled accident that stripped away any opportunity for strategic framing or careful preparation. "Silver," someone whispered, the word carrying across the grounds with startling speed. "The prophecy child, it's real." Panic began spreading through the gathered crowd, some pulling their own children back protectively, others whispering urgently to companions nearby, spreading the news with the kind of rapid momentum that made containing the situation entirely impossible. Lena clutched Ren tightly against her chest, backing away instinctively as the crowd's attention shifted entirely toward her and her son. "It's him," another voice called out, louder this time, drawing even more attention toward the unfolding scene. "The silver pup from the prophecy." Lena's mind raced desperately, searching for any way to salvage the situation, to explain away what dozens of witnesses had just seen with their own eyes. But she understood with sinking certainty that no explanation could undo what had already been witnessed, that the careful concealment she had maintained for weeks had collapsed entirely within the span of a few chaotic seconds. Warriors who had been supervising the training exercises turned their attention toward the commotion, their expressions shifting from mild curiosity to genuine alarm, as word of the silver pup spread through their ranks. One of them, a senior warrior Lena recognized as one of Kale's most trusted advisors, stepped forward with authority, his gaze fixed intently on Ren. "Bring the pup and his mother before the Alpha King immediately," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument or negotiation. "This matter cannot wait." Lena felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her as the warrior escorted her firmly, though not unkindly, toward the central meeting area where Kale typically addressed matters requiring his direct attention. She held Ren close, her mind spinning through every possible outcome, every consequence that might follow from this forced revelation happening in such a public, uncontrolled manner. Word of the silver pup spread through the pack with astonishing speed, gathering an increasingly large crowd of onlookers who followed at a respectful distance as Lena was led toward the meeting stone. Whispers surrounded her, some carrying tones of fear, others curiosity, still others something that sounded almost like reverence, as though witnessing the fulfillment of prophecy carried its own strange fascination, despite the uncertainty of what it truly meant. Doran, the eldest elder, appeared among the gathering crowd, his weathered face carrying an expression of intense focus as he approached to examine the situation directly. Edwin followed closely behind him, his own expression far harder to read, though Lena caught a flicker of something calculating within his gaze as he observed the unfolding scene. "Let me see him," Doran said, his voice carrying the authority of his position despite his advanced age. Lena hesitated only a moment before allowing the elder to examine Ren more closely, understanding that resistance now would accomplish nothing beyond delaying an inevitable confrontation. Doran studied the silver patches visible beneath the fading walnut stain, his expression shifting through several emotions Lena struggled to interpret fully. Finally, he straightened, turning to address the gathered crowd with solemn gravity. "The prophecy has come to pass," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the grounds. "A silver-born child walks among us." The crowd's reaction proved immediate and varied, some gasping in shock, others murmuring nervously among themselves, a few even backing away as though physical distance might somehow protect them from whatever destiny the prophecy foretold. Lena felt Ren tense within her arms, perhaps sensing the tension surrounding him despite his young age and limited understanding of the situation unfolding around him. "The Alpha King must decide his fate," Doran continued, turning toward the path leading to Kale's private quarters. "Someone summon him immediately. This matter requires his direct judgment." As word was sent to fetch Kale, the crowd continued growing, curiosity and fear drawing more pack members toward the unfolding scene with each passing moment. Lena stood at the center of it all, holding her son protectively while feeling increasingly exposed and vulnerable beneath the weight of so many watching eyes. Edwin stepped closer during the waiting period, his expression carefully neutral, though Lena detected an undercurrent of satisfaction that made her deeply uneasy. "It seems concealment proved impossible after all," he said quietly, his words meant only for her ears. "Perhaps it would have served you better to trust my earlier advice regarding caution." Lena refused to respond to his veiled taunt, keeping her attention focused instead on comforting Ren, who had begun fussing slightly, likely disturbed by the tension and noise surrounding them. She would not give Edwin the satisfaction of seeing her fear or frustration, maintaining what composure she could manage despite the overwhelming circumstances. Ivy appeared through the crowd moments later, having heard the commotion and rushed to find her friend amid the chaos. She pushed her way toward Lena, offering silent support through her presence alone, standing protectively beside her despite the risk of association with such a controversial situation. "I'm here," Ivy whispered, squeezing Lena's arm reassuringly. "Whatever happens, you're not facing this alone." The crowd's murmuring grew louder as movement near the northern path indicated Kale's approach. Lena's heart pounded fiercely as she watched the Alpha King emerge from his quarters, his expression unreadable as he took in the significant gathering assembled before him, along with the small silver-streaked pup held carefully in her arms. Kale's gaze swept across the crowd before settling directly on Lena and Ren, his expression giving away nothing of his internal thoughts as he approached with measured, deliberate steps. The entire pack seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting to see how their leader would respond to the prophecy that had finally, undeniably, revealed itself among them. Kale stopped a few paces before Lena, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the gathered crowd as afternoon sunlight filtered through the surrounding trees. His eyes moved slowly from Lena's face down to Ren, studying the silver patches visible beneath the smudged remains of walnut stain with an intensity that made the entire clearing fall into complete silence. "Explain this," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority that demanded immediate honesty. Lena drew a steadying breath, understanding that this moment would determine not just her own fate, but the entire future her son might face within the pack. She could not afford hesitation or evasion now, not with so many witnesses present and so much already exposed through the uncontrolled events of the afternoon. "My son was born with silver fur," she said clearly, projecting her voice enough to carry across the silent gathering despite the trembling she felt within her chest. "I have hidden this truth since his birth, fearing how the pack might respond given the old prophecy." A murmur rippled through the crowd at her admission. though Kale's expression remained carefully composed, giving nothing away of his internal judgment. "Why hide something so significant rather than bringing it forward immediately?" he asked, his tone neither accusatory nor sympathetic, simply seeking understanding. "Because I feared for his safety," Lena replied honestly, her maternal instincts overriding any remaining caution about how her words might be perceived. "I did not know whether the pack would view him as a blessing or a curse, whether the elders might take him from me, whether others might see him as a threat requiring elimination, before he ever had the chance to grow and choose his own path." Doran stepped forward at this point, addressing Kale directly with the authority granted by his position among the elders. "The old texts speak clearly of this moment, my king. A silver-born child arrives during a season of unusual omens, destined to shape the pack's future toward either great strength or devastating ruin. The choice of path depends entirely on how he is raised and guided throughout his early years." Kale considered these words carefully, his gaze returning to study Ren once more, the small pup now quiet and still, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment despite his limited understanding. "And what do the texts say determines which path he follows?" Kale asked, directing his question toward Doran while his eyes remained fixed on the child. "The texts remain frustratingly vague on that matter," Doran admitted, a note of frustration evident in his weathered voice. "Some interpretations suggest the child's own choices during adulthood determine the outcome. Others suggest the pack's treatment of him during his formative years shapes his eventual path more significantly than any innate destiny." Edwin, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke up, his tone carefully measured though Lena detected the underlying agenda within his carefully chosen words. "Given such uncertainty, perhaps caution demands we consider whether the risk of raising such a child within our pack outweighs any potential benefit his prophesied strength might eventually provide." The implication behind his words sent a fresh wave of fear through Lena's chest, understanding immediately that Edwin sought to plant seeds of doubt that might lead toward a far more dangerous outcome for her son. She opened her mouth to protest, but Kale raised a hand slightly, silencing the gathering before further discussion could unfold. "I have heard enough theoretical discussion," Kale said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. "I will make my own assessment based on what I observed directly." He crouched down to Ren's level, much as he had done during his earlier visit to Lena's den, though this time his examination carried far greater weight given the public nature of the current gathering. He studied the pup's face closely, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the silver fur now clearly visible beneath the fading stain. Ren, perhaps sensing the importance of this moment despite his young age, met Kale's gaze steadily, his small dark eyes carrying an unusual alertness for an infant of his age. Kale's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as he studied the child, something flickering behind his composed exterior that Lena could not quite identify. "Remarkable," Kale murmured, almost to himself, before straightening and turning to address the crowd with the full authority of his position. "This pup carries himself with unusual calm for one so young, particularly given the chaos and attention surrounding him at this moment. Such composure suggests strength of character rather than weakness or vulnerability." Lena felt a flicker of hope building within her chest at these words, though she remained cautious about assuming Kale's ultimate decision based on this single observation alone. The crowd remained silent, waiting anxiously to hear what judgment their leader would render regarding the fate of the prophesied child, now standing so publicly exposed before them. "I have led this pack through difficult seasons," Kale continued, his voice growing stronger as he addressed the assembled crowd more broadly. "Through territorial disputes, through harsh winters, through challenges that tested our strength and resilience as a community. I did not achieve success through blind adherence to superstition, nor through hasty decisions driven by fear of the unknown." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd before returning to rest on Ren once more. "This child represents uncertainty, yes, but uncertainty is not inherently dangerous. It is simply unknown, waiting to be shaped by the choices we make moving forward." Doran shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain where Kale's reasoning was leading, while Edwin's expression grew increasingly tense, perhaps sensing that his earlier suggestion toward caution and elimination held little sway over the Alpha King's evolving judgment. "I have made my decision," Kale announced finally, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority across the silent gathering. The entire crowd leaned forward slightly, anticipation and anxiety mixing together as everyone waited to hear what fate awaited the silver pup and his mother. Lena held her breath, clutching Ren tightly against her chest, praying silently that whatever words followed would bring protection rather than danger for the son she had fought so desperately to shield throughout the past weeks of careful concealment and mounting fear. "This child," Kale declared, his voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering, will not be feared, nor hidden, nor eliminated, based on old superstitions we cannot fully verify. Instead, I declare him under my direct protection, to be raised with the full support and resources of this pack. A stunned silence fell over the crowd, the announcement clearly not what most had anticipated given the fear and uncertainty surrounding the prophecy's fulfillment. Lena stared at Kale in disbelief, her mind struggling to process words she had hardly dared hope to hear. "My king," Doran said carefully, stepping forward with evident concern. "Such a decision carries significant risk. If the prophecy speaks true regarding potential ruin, placing him under your direct protection could—" "Could what?" Kale interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "Endanger the pack further than hiding him away or eliminating him might? I have considered every possibility, Doran. A child raised in fear and secrecy, taught that his very existence represents danger, seems far more likely to fulfill a path toward ruin than one raised with guidance, support, and genuine belonging within our community." He turned to address the crowd more broadly, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "If this child is destined to shape our future, I intend to ensure that future reflects strength, wisdom, and unity, rather than fear and division. We will raise him not as a symbol to be feared, but as a member of this pack deserving the same protection and guidance we would offer any other child among us." Murmurs of surprise and uncertain approval rippled through the crowd, many pack members exchanging glances that suggested cautious optimism mixed with lingering apprehension. Edwin's expression darkened noticeably, though he said nothing further, clearly recognizing that voicing continued opposition now would only undermine his standing before the Alpha King and the assembled pack. Kale turned his attention back to Lena, his expression softening slightly as he addressed her directly. "You acted out of fear for your son's safety. Understandable, given the uncertainty surrounding his birth. I do not fault you for the concealment, though I hope you understand that continued secrecy would have only delayed rather than prevented this moment." "I understand," Lena replied, relief flooding through her chest even as she processed the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Thank you, for choosing protection rather than fear." "Do not thank me yet," Kale said, his tone carrying a note of seriousness that tempered the relief building within her. "Protection under my direct authority means Ren's upbringing will not remain entirely within your control alone. He will receive training and guidance appropriate to his prophesied significance, alongside whatever love and care you continue providing as his mother." Lena nodded, understanding the practical implications of Kale's decision, even as gratitude for his choice to protect rather than condemn her son overwhelmed her initial concerns about shared authority over his upbringing. "Whatever guidance serves his well-being and safety, I welcome it," she said sincerely. Kale studied her a moment longer, something like respect flickering behind his sharp gaze, before he turned to address the crowd once more. "Let it be known throughout our territory that this child, Ren, stands under my direct protection. Any who seek to harm him, whether through action or through the spreading of fear and division regarding his prophesied nature, will answer directly to me." The finality in his tone left little room for further debate or opposition, even among those who harbored private doubts about the wisdom of his decision. The crowd began dispersing slowly, murmured conversations continuing as pack members processed the dramatic events they had just witnessed, though the immediate danger of open hostility toward Ren seemed to have been effectively neutralized through Kale's public and unequivocal declaration. Ivy remained close beside Lena throughout the dispersing crowd, her expression carrying relief mixed with lingering astonishment at the unexpected outcome. "I did not anticipate such an outcome," she admitted quietly, once most of the crowd had moved beyond earshot. "I worried we were preparing you for a much harsher judgment." "As did I," Lena admitted, still processing the surreal nature of everything that had transpired within the span of a single afternoon. "I feared the worst, prepared myself for the possibility of losing him entirely, or facing punishment for my weeks of concealment." Marta approached as well, having witnessed the dramatic proceedings from the edges of the dispersing crowd. "The Alpha King has always possessed sharper wisdom than most give him credit for," she observed, a note of quiet approval evident in her weathered voice. "He recognizes that fear breeds the very outcomes it seeks to prevent, while support and guidance often produce far different results." Lena looked down at Ren, who had settled peacefully against her chest, despite the chaos and tension surrounding the recent events. His silver fur, now fully visible without any remaining trace of the walnut stain she had maintained for weeks, gleamed softly in the afternoon sunlight, no longer a secret requiring desperate concealment, but rather a truth now openly acknowledged and protected by the pack's highest authority. "What happens now?" she asked, directing her question toward Marta, uncertain what practical changes this dramatic shift in circumstances might bring to her daily life and her son's upbringing. Kale will likely arrange for Ren's training to begin as he grows older, Marta explained, drawing on her years of experience within pack traditions and hierarchies. Special tutors, perhaps guidance from the elders themselves, regarding the old prophecies and what they might mean for his future role within our community. And my own role in his upbringing? Lena pressed, concern lingering despite the relief of avoiding the harshest possible outcomes she had feared throughout recent weeks. You remain his mother, Marta said firmly, offering reassurance that eased some of Lena's remaining anxiety. No decree from the Alpha King changes that fundamental truth. You will simply share guidance and protection with additional resources the pack now offers, rather than carrying the full weight of his protection entirely alone, as you have throughout these difficult early weeks. Lena absorbed this reassurance gratefully, understanding that while significant changes lay ahead regarding how Ren would be raised and protected, her fundamental role as his mother remained secure. She glanced toward the path where Kale had disappeared following his declaration, wondering what additional conversations and arrangements awaited in the coming days as the pack adjusted to this unprecedented situation. As evening approached and the grounds gradually emptied of the curious crowds that had gathered earlier, Lena made her way back toward her den, Ren resting peacefully in her arms, his silver fur no longer requiring the desperate concealment that had defined their existence since his birth. Yet even as relief settled over her regarding the immediate danger they had narrowly avoided, she could not shake a lingering unease, aware that Edwin's dissatisfaction with Kale's decision suggested this dramatic revelation marked not an ending to their challenges, but rather the beginning of new complications that would require continued vigilance and careful navigation in the seasons ahead. In the days that followed Kale's public declaration, life within the pack settled into an uneasy adjustment, most members accepting the Alpha King's decision with the deference typically shown toward his judgment, even if private doubts lingered among some regarding the wisdom of protecting rather than fearing the prophesied child. Lena found herself no longer needing to hide Ren's silver fur, though the attention his unusual appearance drew still made her uncomfortable during necessary excursions through the territory. Edwin, however, had not abandoned his concerns so easily. In the privacy of his own dwelling, he gathered a small group of like-minded pack members, individuals who shared his unease regarding the potential risks the silver pup represented to the established order and hierarchy they had worked hard to maintain over many years. The Alpha King grows sentimental in his judgment, Edwin said quietly to the gathered group, his voice carrying the calculated tone of someone accustomed to political maneuvering within pack structures, protecting this child based on the naive hope that kindness alone will shape his path toward benefit rather than ruin. Such thinking ignores the deeper truths embedded within our oldest prophecies. What do you propose? Asked one of his companions, a wolf named Owen who had long harbored ambitions of rising within the pack's advisory ranks, ambitions that Edwin had carefully cultivated and encouraged over recent months in exchange for loyalty to his own agenda. We cannot openly oppose Kale's decree, Edwin replied carefully, understanding the practical limitations imposed by the Alpha King's clear and public declaration of protection. But we can work quietly to ensure the child's influence remains limited, that his training emphasizes control and restraint, rather than the strength the prophecy suggests he might otherwise develop. Another member of the small gathering, a wolf named Hazel who served among the pack's healers alongside Marta, spoke up with evident concern, and if such quiet manipulation fails, if the child grows into whatever strength the prophecy foretells despite our efforts to limit his development. Edwin's expression grew colder, calculating possibilities that clearly extended beyond simple manipulation of the child's upbringing. Then more direct measures may become necessary, though I would prefer to avoid such drastic action, if quieter methods prove sufficient to manage the risk he represents. The implication behind his words left an uncomfortable silence among the gathered group, several members shifting uneasily at the suggestion that direct harm toward an innocent pup might eventually become part of their strategy. Owen, despite his ambitions, appeared visibly uncomfortable with this direction, though he said nothing to openly challenge Edwin's leadership within their small conspiracy. Unaware of these private machinations, Lena continued adjusting to her new circumstances, grateful for the pack's official protection, even as she remained watchful for any signs of the lingering hostility she suspected still existed beneath the surface of public acceptance. Kale had arranged for additional resources to support Ren's early development, including regular visits from experienced pack members who specialized in early childhood guidance and training appropriate for pups showing unusual strength or abilities. During one such visit, Lena met Nolan, a warrior known throughout the pack for his patience and skill in training young pups, tasked by Kale with beginning early observation of Ren's development to identify any special abilities that might emerge as he grew older. Nolan's demeanor proved gentle and encouraging, quite different from the intimidating reputation warriors typically carried within pack culture. He shows remarkable alertness for his age, Nolan observed during one visit, watching as Ren tracked movement around the den with unusual focus and attention. Most pups his age remain far more easily distracted or overwhelmed by new stimuli. Is that concerning? Lena asked, still uncertain how to interpret every unusual trait her son displayed given the weight of prophecy surrounding his very existence. Not concerning, Nolan reassured her, offering a warm smile that eased some of her lingering anxiety. Simply notable. Many strong warriors display similar early signs of heightened awareness and focus. It may simply reflect innate strength rather than anything more mysterious tied to old prophecies. Lena appreciated Nolan's grounded, practical perspective, finding it a welcome contrast to the heavy weight of mystical significance that so many others attach to every aspect of Ren's development. She began looking forward to his regular visits, finding in his calm guidance a source of reassurance that helped ease the constant underlying anxiety she carried regarding her son's uncertain future. Meanwhile, Edwin's quiet conspiracy continued developing beneath the surface of pack life, gathering additional sympathizers among those who harbored similar concerns about the risks posed by the prophesied child's continued presence within their community. He moved carefully, avoiding any actions that might draw direct suspicion from Kale or his loyal advisors, understanding that open opposition would only result in his own downfall, given the Alpha King's clear and public commitment to Ren's protection. Several weeks after the dramatic public revelation, Lena received an unexpected visit from Kale himself, who arrived at her den with a proposition that would significantly alter the trajectory of her son's upbringing moving forward. "I have been considering Ren's long-term development," Kale said, settling into the modest space of her den with the same commanding presence he carried throughout all his interactions within the pack. "Given the significance many attach to his prophesied nature, I believe closer oversight during his formative years would serve his safety and development more effectively than the current arrangement of periodic visits and check-ins." "What are you proposing?" Lena asked cautiously, uncertain what deeper involvement Kale intended given his position as Alpha King and the demanding responsibilities that surely occupied the majority of his time and attention. "I would like you and Ren to relocate closer to the central grounds, near my own quarters," Kale explained, his tone carefully measured as he outlined his reasoning. "This would allow more direct oversight of his development, quicker response should any threats emerge regarding his safety, and more consistent access to the training and guidance appropriate for someone of his prophesied significance." Lena hesitated, understanding the practical benefits Kale described even as the prospect of such significant change filled her with uncertainty. Moving closer to the central grounds meant leaving the relative privacy and familiarity of her current den, placing herself and her son more directly within the constant observation and scrutiny that came with proximity to the pack's highest authority. "I understand this represents a significant change," Kale continued, seeming to sense her hesitation, "but I believe it offers the best path toward ensuring Ren's continued safety, particularly given that not everyone within our pack has fully embraced my decision to protect rather than fear him." His final words carried an implicit acknowledgement that troubled Lena deeply, confirming her own suspicions that lingering hostility and potential danger remained, despite the outward calm that had settled over pack life since his public declaration weeks earlier. "Do you believe someone specifically intends harm toward my son?" she asked directly, needing clarity regarding the actual threats they faced rather than vague implications she could not adequately prepare against. Kale's expression grew serious, his sharp eyes studying her carefully before he responded. "I have received whispers. Nothing concrete enough to act upon directly, but concerning enough that I believe increased vigilance serves everyone's interests moving forward. I would rather act preventively based on uncertain suspicion than react too late should genuine danger materialize." Lena absorbed this warning with growing unease, understanding that the peaceful adjustment she had begun experiencing following Kale's public protection remained more fragile than she had allowed herself to believe. She thought immediately of Edwin, of his veiled threats and obvious dissatisfaction with the Alpha King's judgment, wondering whether his continued opposition extended beyond simple disagreement into something far more dangerous for her son's continued safety. "I accept your proposal," she said finally, recognizing that whatever discomfort came with relocating closer to Kale's direct oversight paled in comparison to the potential risks of remaining vulnerable to threats she could not adequately identify or defend against on her own. "Whatever measures best ensure Ren's safety, I am willing to embrace them." Kale nodded, apparent satisfaction evident in his expression at her agreement. I will arrange everything necessary for your relocation within the coming days. In the meantime, please maintain heightened caution, particularly regarding unfamiliar visitors or unusual requests to spend time alone with Ren, regardless of how innocent such requests might initially appear. His warning left Lena with a renewed sense of vigilance as she prepared for the significant changes ahead, understanding that while the immediate danger of public rejection and elimination had been avoided through Kale's decisive intervention, quieter threats continued lurking beneath the surface of pack life, waiting for opportunities to strike against the vulnerable child, whose very existence continued to divide opinion and stir dangerous ambitions among those unwilling to accept the Alpha King's judgment regarding his protection and future within their community. The relocation to quarters near the central grounds happened swiftly, Kale arranging for a comfortable new den to be prepared within days of their conversation. Lena settled into the unfamiliar surroundings with cautious optimism, appreciating the increased security while still adjusting to the constant proximity of pack activity that came with living so close to the Alpha King's own quarters. Nolan continued his regular visits, now more frequent given the shorter distance between their dwellings, and Lena found herself growing increasingly comfortable with his steady, reassuring presence during Ren's continued development. Yet despite this positive adjustment, an undercurrent of unease persisted, fueled by Kale's warning regarding unconfirmed threats, and Edwin's continued cold civility whenever their paths crossed within the busier central grounds. One afternoon, while gathering supplies near the healing grounds, Lena overheard a fragment of conversation that sent a fresh chill through her chest. Rounding a corner near Marta's dwelling, she caught sight of Hazel, one of the healers, speaking in hushed tones with someone Lena did not immediately recognize. "Cannot continue indefinitely," Hazel was saying, her voice tight with what sounded like genuine distress. "Edwin grows more insistent with each passing week, and I fear where his plans might lead if left unchecked." Lena froze, pressing herself against the wall of a nearby structure, straining to hear more without revealing her presence. The unfamiliar voice responded, too quiet for Lena to make out specific words, though the tone carried obvious agreement with Hazel's evident concern. "If Kale discovers what Edwin truly intends," Hazel continued, her voice dropping even lower, "the consequences will be severe, not just for Edwin, but for anyone associated with his schemes. I did not agree to this arrangement expecting matters to progress toward actual harm against an innocent child." Lena's blood ran cold at these words, confirming her worst suspicions regarding Edwin's continued opposition to Kale's protective decree. She remained frozen in place, desperate to hear more details that might help her understand the specific nature of the threat facing her son. But the conversation shifted to more mundane topics, as the unfamiliar voice mentioned needing to return to other duties before suspicion arose regarding their extended absence. Once the coast seemed clear, Lena hurried away from the area, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just overheard. Hazel, someone she had previously trusted as one of the pack's healers, appeared entangled within whatever conspiracy Edwin continued nurturing against her son, though her evident discomfort suggested she harbored genuine reservations about how far his plans might ultimately extend. Lena debated internally whether to bring this information directly to Kale, weighing the potential consequences of accusing pack members based on an overheard fragment of conversation without concrete evidence to support more serious action. Yet the alternative, remaining silent while genuine danger potentially gathered against Ren, felt far too risky given everything she had already sacrificed to protect her son throughout the preceding weeks. She decided to seek Marta's counsel first, trusting the healer's wisdom and discretion given their established history of confidence regarding Ren's true nature. She found Marta preparing herbal remedies within her dwelling, the familiar scent of crushed leaves filling the modest space, as Lena explained what she had overheard near the healing grounds. Marta's expression grew increasingly grave as Lena recounted the conversation, her weathered features reflecting deep concern rather than surprise at the revelation. "I had suspected Hazel's involvement in something troubling," she admitted quietly. "She has seemed distracted and anxious in recent weeks, though I did not wish to accuse her without clearer evidence." "What should I do?" Lena asked, desperate for guidance given the weight of the decision facing her. Bring this directly to Kale, risk accusing pack members without solid proof, or remain silent and hope the danger resolves itself without escalating further? Marta considered the question carefully before responding. Kale values evidence and careful reasoning above rushed accusations. Bringing him a fragment of overheard conversation without additional context might not provide sufficient grounds for decisive action. Yet withholding this information entirely risks allowing genuine danger to continue developing unchecked. "Perhaps," Marta continued, after a thoughtful pause, "the wisest path involves sharing what you overheard while acknowledging its limitations, allowing Kale to determine how best to investigate further given his greater resources and authority within pack matters. Lena nodded, recognizing the wisdom within Marta's suggestion. She thanked the healer for her counsel before making her way toward Kale's quarters, determined to share what she had learned despite her uncertainty regarding how the Alpha King might respond to such incomplete information. She found Kale reviewing reports with several advisors when she arrived, though he immediately dismissed the others upon seeing her expression, recognizing that her visit carried significant urgency beyond typical matters of daily concern. "What has happened?" he asked directly, his sharp gaze studying her carefully as she struggled to compose her thoughts into a coherent explanation. Lena recounted the overheard conversation as accurately as she could remember, careful to acknowledge the limitations of what she had actually witnessed versus what she merely suspected based on incomplete fragments of dialogue. Kale listened intently, his expression growing increasingly serious as she detailed Hazel's evident distress and the implication of ongoing schemes orchestrated by Edwin against Wren's continued safety. "This confirms suspicions I have harbored for some time," Kale said finally, once Lena had finished her account. "Edwin has grown increasingly bold in his private opposition to my decisions, though he has been careful to avoid providing concrete evidence I could act upon directly." "What will you do?" Lena asked, anxiety building within her chest as she awaited his response. "I will investigate further, carefully and quietly, to gather the evidence needed to address this matter definitively," Kale replied, his tone carrying steady determination despite the gravity of the situation. "In the meantime, I want you and Wren to remain within closer proximity to my personal guards, at least until I better understand the full extent of whatever scheme Edwin has been developing." Lena nodded, grateful for Kale's decisive response even as fresh anxiety settled over her regarding the uncertain days ahead. She returned to her den that evening with heightened vigilance, checking every shadow, every unfamiliar sound, understanding that the danger facing her son had grown far more concrete and immediate than the vague superstitious fear that had originally driven her toward weeks of desperate concealment following his birth. That night, as she settled Wren into sleep, watching his small chest rise and fall peacefully despite the danger swirling around him, Lena found herself confronting the weight of an impossible choice that had been building steadily throughout recent weeks. She could continue trusting Kale's protection, relying on his authority and resources to neutralize whatever threat Edwin represented, hoping that his careful investigation would resolve the danger before it could materialize into actual harm against her son. Or she could take matters into her own hands entirely, perhaps fleeing the territory with Wren before Edwin's schemes could progress any further, seeking safety somewhere beyond the reach of both the ancient prophecy and the political ambitions that continued to threaten her son's well-being despite the Alpha King's public protection. Neither option offered guaranteed safety, and both carried significant risks she could not fully calculate given the uncertainty surrounding Edwin's true intentions and capabilities. She thought of everything she had already sacrificed throughout the preceding weeks, the exhaustion of constant vigilance, the fear that had colored every interaction since discovering her son's true nature, and wondered whether continuing to trust others with his protection represented wisdom or simply a desperate hope that circumstances would resolve favorably without requiring more drastic action on her own part. As dawn approached, she made her decision, recognizing that fleeing alone would strip her son of the protection and resources Kale's authority provided, resources that likely offered better odds of neutralizing Edwin's scheme than her own limited abilities to evade danger indefinitely, while surviving beyond the safety of established pack territory. She would trust Kale's investigation, while remaining vigilantly prepared to act independently, should his efforts prove insufficient to protect her son from whatever darkness Edwin continued nurturing against him. Kale's investigation moved forward with careful precision over the following days, his trusted advisors quietly gathering information regarding Edwin's activities and associations, without alerting him to the growing scrutiny surrounding his private schemes. Nolan, in addition to his regular training visits with Wren, proved instrumental in this effort, using his respected position among the pack's warriors to observe and report unusual patterns of behavior among those suspected of involvement in Edwin's conspiracy. Hazel, the healer whose distressed conversation Lena had overheard, eventually became the key to unraveling the full scope of Edwin's intentions. Approached privately by Kale himself, she broke down under the weight of her own guilt and fear, revealing details of a plan far more serious than simple political maneuvering or attempts to limit Wren's future influence within the pack. Edwin, it emerged, had been planning to orchestrate what would appear as a tragic accident, one that would eliminate Wren entirely, while providing enough plausible deniability to avoid direct suspicion falling upon himself or his small group of co-conspirators. Owen, despite his initial ambitions aligning with Edwin's agenda, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with this darker turn, ultimately confirming Hazel's account when confronted directly by Cale's advisors. Armed with this damning testimony, Cale called for an emergency gathering of the pack, summoning all members to the central grounds where he intended to address the conspiracy directly and definitively. Lena attended with Ren, held securely in her arms, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief that the danger would finally be confronted openly, and anxiety regarding how the confrontation might unfold given the serious nature of the accusations about to be revealed. Edwin stood among the gathered crowd, his expression carefully composed despite the summons that had clearly caught him off guard given its unusual urgency. Cale emerged from his quarters, his presence commanding immediate silence, as the assembled pack awaited his address with evident curiosity and concern. "I have called this gathering to address a serious matter that threatens the unity and safety of our pack," Cale began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. "Evidence has come to light regarding a conspiracy orchestrated against an innocent child under my direct protection." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as attention shifted increasingly toward Edwin, whose expression grew visibly tense despite his attempts to maintain outward composure. Cale continued, detailing the testimony gathered from Hazel and Owen, outlining the specific nature of the planned harm against Ren, with methodical precision that left little room for doubt regarding the seriousness of the accusations. "Edwin," Cale said finally, turning his full attention toward the accused elder, "step forward and answer to these charges before the entire pack." For a tense moment, Edwin remained frozen, clearly calculating whether denial or confession offered better prospects given the substantial evidence Cale had already presented. Finally, recognizing the futility of continued denial, given Hazel and Owen's corroborating testimony, he stepped forward, his expression hardening into something resembling defiant justification rather than remorse. "I did what I believed necessary to protect this pack from unknown dangers," Edwin declared, his voice carrying conviction despite the gravity of his admitted actions. "The old prophecies speak of ruin as easily as they speak of salvation. I was not willing to gamble our entire community's future on naive hope alone." "And so you chose to harm an innocent child rather than trust in guidance and support to shape his path toward benefit rather than destruction," Cale responded, his tone carrying quiet but unmistakable anger beneath its controlled surface. "Your fear led you toward exactly the kind of division and darkness that risks fulfilling the very ruin you claim to be preventing." The crowd remained tensely silent as Cale addressed the full weight of Edwin's betrayal, his judgment ultimately resulting in Edwin's banishment from Blackthorn territory, a severe consequence reserved for the most serious violations of pack trust and safety. Owen, given his eventual cooperation and evident remorse, received a lesser punishment involving extended service and probation, while Hazel's willingness to expose the conspiracy despite her own involvement earned her a path toward redemption through continued service to the pack's healing traditions. As the gathering dispersed following Edwin's banishment, a palpable sense of relief settled over the pack, the resolution of this internal threat offering closure to the tension and uncertainty that had shadowed recent weeks since Ren's dramatic public revelation. Lena felt the weight of constant fear finally beginning to lift from her shoulders, understanding that the most immediate and serious danger facing her son had been definitively neutralized through Cale's decisive judgment. In the days that followed, life within the pack gradually settled into a new, more stable rhythm. Ren continued growing under the combined guidance of Lena's maternal love and the various resources Cale had arranged for his development, his silver fur no longer a secret, requiring desperate concealment but rather an accepted, even celebrated aspect of his unique identity within the community. Cale visited more frequently as weeks turned into months, his interest in Ren's development evolving beyond simple political obligation into something resembling genuine personal investment in the child's well-being. Lena found herself increasingly appreciating these visits, not just for the security and resources they provided her son, but for the quiet moments of connection that gradually developed between herself and the Alpha King during their shared commitment to Ren's protection and growth. One evening, as autumn colors began transforming the surrounding forest, Cale visited during a particularly peaceful moment, finding Lena watching Ren take his first unsteady steps within the safety of their den. He settled beside her, watching the small pup's determined efforts with evident warmth. "He grows stronger each day," Cale observed, genuine affection evident in his tone as he watched Ren stumble forward before catching himself and continuing his determined progress across the den floor. "He does," Lena agreed, smiling as she watched her son's persistent efforts. "Though I sometimes still find myself waiting for the other challenge to emerge, some new danger threatening the fragile peace we've finally achieved." Cale turned to study her carefully, something thoughtful passing behind his sharp gaze. Perhaps it is time to stop waiting for danger, and instead trust in the strength we've built together to face whatever challenges might eventually arise. Lena considered his words, recognizing the truth within them, even as old habits of vigilance and fear lingered stubbornly within her heart. You speak as though our partnership in this matter extends beyond simply your role as Alpha King, protecting a prophesied child, she observed carefully, curious about the deeper meaning behind his recent visits and evident personal investment in both her son's development and her own well-being. Perhaps it does, Cale admitted, a rare vulnerability entering his typically composed demeanor. You have shown remarkable strength and wisdom throughout this entire ordeal, Lena. Qualities I have come to respect and admire beyond simply your role as Ren's mother. A comfortable silence settled between them as Ren continued his determined efforts to walk, occasionally glancing toward the adults with the innocent curiosity typical of young pups exploring their expanding capabilities. Lena felt something shift within her chest, a recognition that the partnership formed through crisis and shared commitment to her son's protection had evolved into something deeper, something she had not anticipated when she first hid Ren's silver fur beneath desperate layers of walnut stain so many weeks ago. As the final light of evening faded into the gentle darkness of night, Lena watched her son take his final steps of the day before settling contentedly into sleep, secure in the knowledge that the path ahead, while still uncertain in many respects, no longer carried the desperate weight of fear and isolation that had defined the earliest weeks following his remarkable birth. The Blackthorn pack had weathered the storm of prophecy and conspiracy, emerging with new understanding regarding the strength found in choosing trust and support over fear and division, a lesson that would guide their community as Ren continued growing into whatever destiny truly awaited him, supported now not by desperate concealment, but by the genuine strength of a pack united in protecting one of their own.